favorite one of my favorite stories as I think about getting the employee experience right and what that means from a manager effectiveness point of view as well. And so I was several years ago teaching a seminar, and in that seminar, the whole point was to help managers understand what kind of talents that people could bring to certain roles within their organizations. And this just happened to be a group of restaurant general managers. And as we were kind of going through the session, one of the managers actually said, I have to tell you my best experience over the past year in using this particular interviewing tool. That this lovely young woman, aged 16 years of age, walked in and applied to be a dishwasher. And as he took her through the interview, he began to notice that she shouldn't probably be in the heart of the house, that she had some really interesting talents and ways of connecting with people that really made them feel important and feel valued. And so he actually said to her, A, I want to hire you, but B, I want to put you in as our hostess. Well, turn the clock forward 6 months. Not only was she surviving in her role, she was thriving. She was one of the most popular employees within the restaurant. She knew customers by name. She was one of the most popular employees as well. And one particular evening, her parents came in, and as they finished their meal, they called over this particular general manager and just said, we want to thank you. We have seen an utter transformation in our daughter over the past 6 months. She's getting better grades in school than she's ever gotten. She's involved in activities like cheerleading. She's expanded her circle of friends. And every time we kind of try to figure out what is it that caused this transformation from surviving to thriving, we just all attribute it to you, A, taking a chance on her, and B, putting her in a role that's allowed her to shine. And when you think about what has, happened over the past 2.5 decades in employee research, we really just see that it is having trust in your employees and employees trusting you back. It's providing them with opportunities for growth and development, and recognition. And so as we go through this session today, we're going to answer 3 critical questions that have come out of the refreshed database, the WSA data. So we're going to examine the evolution of the employee experience in those 2.5 decades. And we're going to tap into that massive WSA database to help us really understand what has been important to employees and what is important to employees right now. And more importantly, what are leaders and managers needing to be laser focused on in order to improve those experiences. And we'll also reveal the priorities and actions that every leader from the boardroom to the front line needs to take to foster that stronger connection between the people that report to them and to themselves. And so again, we will leverage that database to help us understand those findings. And so as we kind of move forward, one of the things I would say is that I am excited for all of you. What you're going to learn today, you are the only people outside of WSA who will have been privy to the latest findings from our database. And as we think about it, that database continues to grow. We have over 10 million employees that we've surveyed. We have dropped the oldest data set and added in all of 2023. So literally at the end of last year, we updated the database with the most current information that we have available. And what that allows and affords us to do is to mine that database and understand what is it that is driving employees' levels of motivation, commitment, conscientiousness. What is it that employees are really wanting from the person that they directly report to? And so really, when we kind of break down the last 2 decades of employee research, there's really kind of 4 critical time periods. And so the first one would be what I would call pre-pandemic. And as you look at that time frame, it was really called the decade of growth. So we had just come out of the 2008, financial crisis or financial meltdown, and we were kind of returning to a little bit of normalcy. And you'll see that the blue line is the overall engagement trend, and the orange line is the overall manager effectiveness trend. And so what we saw in that decade of growth was slow, steady, measured progress in both of those 2 critical areas. But as you kind of reflect back, really that decade was a seller's market. In other words, employees really owned what they could ask for from their employers. And we all know about the war for talent, that there just weren't enough qualified, talented people to fill the positions that businesses were needing. And when that happens, then employees are able to say, I get to call the ball, right? What is it that I want out of my career? What is it that I want as I think about my long-term needs and wants? Well, that as we moved forward into January of 2020, I think we all learned very quickly that COVID was not a typical flu. And as we've learned with other previous crises, that when that hits, employees automatically, we expect to see that their engagement scores will jump and jump significantly. And that's what you see happen between the end of 2019 and into that 18-month period. But by the way, if you felt like you were on a roller coaster ride in terms of your own engagement or your team's engagements, you're absolutely right. I mean, we went from the highs of the highs to, to the lows of the lows. And what we really realized in this 18-month period is this really was the year of the senior leader. And what we mean by that is that when crisis hits, it's the actions of leaders and how they guide and lead their company through that mattered most to people, and that had to come from the senior most levels of leadership in the organization. They also wanted to know and have comfort and confidence that this was the right team that could lead them through. And as you all know, there was more communication that came out of the C-suite in that 18-month period of time than we have seen in many, many years. And so when senior leaders got that right, they earned the right to have people say, we will stand shoulder to shoulder with you, and we will walk through these uncharted waters. And so what we really kind of noticed in this 18-month period of time is this was about the collective. It was about the organization. And so the focus really was on we. But then as we continued to move through and kind of hit the post-pandemic 18-month time frame, the shift began to go away from we to me. And what I mean by that is that when employees start to see that there is kind of that light at the end of the proverbial tunnel, they start to say, what's in it for me? And when we really looked at what employees were wanting and asking for from their organizations, it was all about, again, that sense of, where am I headed? What opportunities do I have to learn and grow? And have you valued the sacrifices that I have made in this past, 3-year period of time? And so the focus went from senior leaders to that person that I directly report to. And what you notice is it is in this period of time where manager effectiveness has hit an all-time high, whereas engagement has now gone back to what we would say pre-pandemic levels. And so now let's turn our focus to what we've learned in the last month out of refreshing our database. The first thing that you see is that both engagement and manager effectiveness have remained the same. And so we're really calling this next year a return to emotional normalcy. And what that really means is that we believe that engagement and manager effectiveness, for the most part, are going to stabilize. And when that happens, then we know that more than likely we're going to come back to that sense of, where are we headed? Why is it important? What does it mean to me? Do you value who I am and what I'm bringing to the organization? And as we think through that, it really is now every level of leadership is going to have a different action that they need to be able to take in order to A, improve the employee experience, but B, as well, be perceived to be better leaders, managers, and supervisors. And so we've spent a lot of time in the last quarter of 23 utilizing a suite of different statistical processes to help us understand if we want to be able to predict engagement, what are those items out of the database that have the best demonstration of variance? In other words, if we can move the needle in certain items in certain areas, we can begin to predict that engagement will rise. What we also know is the converse is also true. If we miss in some very important areas that employees are telling us about, then the likelihood that engagement begins to slide backwards in organizations also is true. And so here are, again, hot off the presses, the top 10 global items that are helping us predict engagement. And I know it looks like a really big list, and so I'm going to just kind of highlight some things for you. Let's start with items 1, 7, and 8. And as you look at that, it's all about future vision. And it's about trust in leadership. That's what 1, 7, and 8 are indicating. What we know is that that is senior leadership. They have to be able to create a compelling vision of where the organization is headed, and they need to have an emotional component to it. And I think about, an auto worker, manufacturing trucks in a plant somewhere, down south. If that person is highly engaged and they understand what it is that they need to do in order to assemble a truck that is safe for families to drive down, the road, down the interstate, that's what we mean by a compelling vision. So at every level, people need to be able to understand that. But what was most intriguing to me when I looked at the top drivers is that 2 through 6, and 9 and 10, when you start to read those, feeling a part of a team, valuing my contribution, opportunities for advancement, two-way communication, feeling valued and recognized, who in the organization has the greatest likelihood to move those levers in order to create those actions and opportunities for employees? And it really is that person that I directly report to. So as we think about the different levels of leadership in the organization, our advice would be twofold. One, senior leaders need to keep doing what they were doing during the pandemic and post-pandemic. But it really is that kind of frontline leader, that mid-level manager who we really believe has to rise to the occasion because their employees are asking more of them than they ever have before. But what we also know is that they're getting pressure from the top down to be able to execute as well. And so if ever there were a time to help managers understand, A, what do employees mean when they talk about outstanding management, outstanding supervision, outstanding leadership? And then B, what are some very clear, specific actions that anyone who leads a team of people can actually take on so that they can be perceived to be better leaders? And so we actually have done a lot of research to understand, what do employees want when they think about the person they directly report to? Number one, I've never heard anyone say, I want to work for a manager or a leader or a supervisor who's simply average at what they do, right? They want someone to inspire them, excite them, and they want to be able to say, I will follow you in terms of where you're headed. And that's really that first piece around manager effectiveness. Secondly, it's all about what we term air traffic control. So it's twofold. One, are you removing barriers, obstacles that could prevent your teams from giving their best work? And are you optimizing the work environment? In other words, if I do want to give my best work, how can you help me be even more productive? And so in some cases, that's scheduling. In some cases, it's training. In some, it's just providing the right kind of resources that people need in order to be more efficient and more effective in their work. And most oftentimes, it's this third one that is the most difficult for people. And it is really what we call the softer skills. And this is about really that one-on-one contact with every single person on my team. It's understanding how to listen. How do I support? How do I care about your overall well-being? And so as we looked at manager effectiveness overall, we were able to again access WSA data. And we went in and said, what are the top 5 actions that if I want to be perceived to be a better leader, I need to be able to demonstrate to my team. And so here they are. And as you start to look at them around the circle, it's about being an effective listener. So this isn't about pushing out information. It's about asking for and listening to people. And what we know is that once people feel that you're listening to them, they're much more willing and able to listen back. The next 2, this is all around feedback. And sometimes feedback is meant from a coaching perspective. And what we mean by that is I may have to help you in areas that you are falling short in. And how do I do that in a way that is productive and helps you get better at what you do? Number 3, it's not sitting in your office, right? This is out and about or on the phone or email or Slack or whatever it may be in terms of giving that feedback in a timely and helpful manner. That whole concept of, do you do what you say you're going to do? Do you walk the talk? Can I have confidence, faith, and trust in what you say and in what you do? And then lastly, this is personal. This is about understanding for every person in my team. I know their goals. I know their aspirations. And oftentimes I think as supervisors, managers, and leaders, we tend to assume what it is that people want as they think about their futures. And so my advice would be twofold. If you don't have those 10 top global drivers of engagement as a part of your overall employee listening strategy, those 10 need to be in there because they are critical and they're important to the emotional normalcy that we're seeing now out of the database. And then number 2, as you think about any manager training or development, these 5 ingredients are critical. And so I would highly suggest that we sprinkle those in terms of anything that you would do around manager training and development. Because one of the things that we've learned out of the refreshed database is that managers who are the most effective, they hit all 3 of those critical components, right? They are inspirational. They do great air traffic control, and they do have the ability to tap into their softer skills. But what we also know, and this was very clearly demonstrated in the pandemic and post-pandemic world that we lived in the last 3 years, is that there were managers who, even in the best of times, were barely hanging on. And when they were thrust into this unknown environment and ever-changing set of scenarios, they've continued to struggle. And so our database indicates that it's, in a sense, the best have gotten better. And those who are struggling, even in the best of times, are struggling mightily. And knowing that manager and a direct report relationship is incredibly important and critical to the overall employee experience situation, we've really got to be able to help our managers in any way that we can. So that really is, as I said, this is a quick hitter in terms of what we're seeing out of the database. And as we kind of think through it, we started out with three questions. The first was, what is the overall state of leadership in 2024? And leadership is a pretty broad term. It really does encompass supervisors, managers, and leaders. And what we would say the data proves is that it still is at an all-time high. It's holding steady as we move into 24. But again, I think this remains more challenging than ever before, because what we're asking of different levels of the organization is unique to that level in the organization. And so paying attention to what you're learning at your level is critical. I think employees have shifted their focus now. We saw the transition begin at the end of 22 into 23. It's here to stay. I think for the next couple of years, we're going to see a much more me-focused mindset. And that doesn't mean selfishness. What it means is that sense of opportunities and that sense of being valued. And so that ability to personalize and individualize with those on my team is going to be more important than ever. Question number 2. What do employees want most from their leaders? And that is going back again to those top 10 key drivers to move the needle on engagement. And what we're saying really is it's all about a sense of value. And that is when people feel that you care about what they bring to the table. They feel that they're a part of the conversation, so they're involved in important facets of their work, and they get to provide their ideas and their input. And then lastly, that there is that excitement about where the company is headed and what their role is in achieving it. And then lastly, what are the very best actions that leaders can take to improve their overall effectiveness? And so this goes back to those top 5 drivers of manager effectiveness. And I just believe, as we've looked at the data, that if everybody who led a team of people could have their employees say, I am very confident that you know what it is that I want to accomplish here in this organization. So you know where my aspirations lie. Number 2, if you know how people individually want to be recognized, remember recognition and that sense of value is really mission critical in the next couple of years. And that really is individualized. We can't assume. And then lastly, if every employee would know how their work helps the organization win, and therefore they understand how they can win. And again, as you look at those, these really are applying more of those softer skills. So stay tuned. This is kind of our first pass at studying engagement trends as well as manager effectiveness trends. As we kind of move forward and continue to do a deep dive into our refreshed database, we will definitely have more information. And in fact, look for the Workforce Performance Lab publishing our 2024 State of the Workforce Research paper. It will probably drop somewhere into mid or late March. But what we're also excited about, and you see that the QR code here, if you scan that, it's going to take you to the page that shows you all 12 webinars in the series, so that you can see the dates and times, as well as the topics that we are going to continue to produce on a monthly basis. So our next webinar will be on February 21st at 1 p.m. Central. And the topic will be important tips to managing a successful survey. And that will be led by our very own Carrie Rosa, who is our director of implementation. So super excited to kick off this series, and hope that you will continue to follow us and join us as we move through other topics. Are there any questions or comments?
Chris, there's one question in the chat, and I took a stab at it, but if you could weigh in on the slide that had the brief history of the employee experience, and it talked about the different, periods of time where we saw movement and engagement and manager effectiveness. What's your key takeaway from that? Whereas what, in terms of what has happened with engagement over the past 5 years versus manager effectiveness?
So I think the key takeaway, as you just look at this progression, is that with engagement, and I think we all can probably attest to this. It's just been a rocky, it's been a rocky road. When you look at what happened in 2008, I mean, that was an event and it kind of blew up the entire world. And it took a couple of years to get back on track, right? Because there were so many layoffs and so many companies that went under. And so it took a while to kind of rev up the engine again. And then who would know that in, January of 2020, we were going to be hit with something that was not event driven like the previous two crises. It was a marathon and continues to be in some cases a marathon. And so I feel like employees as well as leaders have a bit of a tired component. And that's why I think it's absolutely critical that we're seeing out of our database that there's some stabilization. People need more of that emotional normalcy. And so to me, I think we saw the trend of, we are all in this together when we were in the darkest depths of the pandemic, to now what's organizations who are going to win are going to have managers who are well equipped to help their employees continue to learn, grow, and feel valued. And the opposite is also true. And as I think about one of the next steps out of the database is that we're really going to study this concept of work-life balance and burnout, especially with mid managers, because that's the group that has gotten squeezed the most in the past 3 years. And they've always been asked to do a lot of times more with less. They've been in uncharted territory in terms of bringing on people virtually. And so there's just a lot of factors. And so if I were a senior leader in an organization, if I were an HR leader in an organization, putting things into place that just kind of help people feel that they can take a breath, and that they're being valued by their organization, but more importantly by the person that they directly report to, is going to, I think, re-energize a lot of workforces around the globe.
Chris, how do you see the gap between trust and executive trust to the, excuse me, how do you see the gap between the trust in the executive leadership team and manager effectiveness in the coming years? And what are the smart actions to close that gap?
Okay, that's a really big question. Is it in the chat so I can look at it again?
That's why I just read it right off to you.
Yes, thank you. So what I would say is, and this, it's not only, I think, trust in senior leadership, it also goes back to future vision. So my analogy, and some of you have heard this before, the best way, because I believe future vision and leadership trust go hand in glove, right? If you are spot on in terms of what's the inspirational message to the organization, and then you follow up and act on it, it creates that level of confidence. And the reverse is also true. And so my analogy for organizations that get this right, that close the gap between overall senior leadership confidence and manager effectiveness, is it's like a jigsaw puzzle that senior leaders need to say, here's what the picture needs to look like when all the pieces are put together. Manager effectiveness, in terms of closing that gap, what they have to be able to do is to take that overall picture, and then with everyone on their team say, here's your individual puzzle piece, and where do you go in that jigsaw puzzle to help complete the picture? Because when that doesn't happen, two things occur. One, there's lack of confidence in the person I report to, manager effectiveness, but that future vision then tends to ring hollow, and overall senior leaders at the end take a hit as well. And so while that seems super easy in terms of the analogy, what I know is it's really hard. It's hard to do. And so that's why, again, I'm hoping that in the next year to 2 years that we can have some stability, so that we have the time and the attention to focus in those areas so that we can close that gap. Good question. Okay, if there's nothing else, this was designed to be kind of, as I said, it's a quick 30 minutes. We'll definitely look forward to February's topic. But thanks for joining the first webinar, and I'm super excited that you got to be a part of hearing about the updated database before anyone else in the rest of the world, because we get pretty excited about what we're learning. So I hope you have a good rest of your day and a good rest of your week.